MOvember 2020, day 30, and it's the end of the campaign. So tonight there was a bunch of videos I could still go on with, and I probably will, like I've done in other Movembers, make a few more. But tonight I wanted to just make a video on why I do Movember and what got me into this work. Now, I make my campaign around therapy and men's mental health, even though I know Movember has a very broad men's health campaign around physical health and prostate cancer and other concerns. I sort of use my platform and this campaign to raise awareness around mental health issues. So I want to talk a little bit about being a therapist and how I ended up here. And also, I'm a wounded healer. I'm someone that's got into this work due to getting into my own recovery, so I'll talk a little bit about that. I got an email recently about a person asking me if they were going into therapy, around addictions, what would they do? So I find those questions sort of overwhelming and I haven't answered yet. So I thought this can be part of that answer. It'd be an interesting thing one day for a Movember video to tell my story, but I'll just throw some snippets out there. I don't anticipate to be able to cover it all. But I would like to talk about why I work for myself, why I make these videos, and sometimes in a world of competing social platforms and needs for campaigns and causes, things like Movember, I suppose, can get lost. And I even felt this year, gosh, should I do it myself? Because it was COVID-19 and people are in lockdown and the world seems a bit crazy right now. We've been in unprecedented times, even though that word now sounds a bit old. But when it rolled around, I shaved my mow off, and it's been 30 nights of sitting on my own in here, wheeling out some tool. The main inspiration for that is that early in recovery, when I got in recovery 34 years ago on the 14th of the 4th, 1986, I found myself in the one hospital my mother always warned me you never want to end up in, which was Callan Park, a mental hospital in Sydney. I didn't even know where I was for about 2 or 3 days. I'd look out the window and see this footy field, and I had no idea what I was looking at, and it took me about 3 days to work out it was Leichhardt Oval. And that was the hospital my mother always warned you to never go. And when I think back now, she had mental illness, she had electric shock treatment, she was in and out of hospital when I was a kid. She was probably legitimately scared of ending up there. As part of Detox, they'd wheel you past the Korsakoff's ward, the wet brain ward, and as a way of trying to, scare young people like me to, not end up there in the end. It looked pretty freaky, but I don't think that's what got me clean. On the first night I was in Detox, I ended up at a 12-step meeting. And it blew my mind. I'd never heard anyone speak honestly about how they felt. Not in my whole life. Not like that. And the next day, 3 people came in and did a H&I meeting. And I still remember their shares, A couple of those guys didn't make it. One lady's still sober, 38 years sober. Or clean. And it inspired me. And I only stayed there 5.5 days. And the first time I ever prayed in recovery was to ask God, should I leave? I didn't know. And I don't think at that detox, they didn't wish me any harm, but I just thought they must have thought they were going to see me again. I was 22, first detox. But I went to a meeting every day. And on the last night, I was picked up by a lady and taken to this meeting, and it was another 12-step meeting, and it again blew my mind. And I watched this guy chair the meeting, and it became an important connection because he gave me his number. He said, listen, ring me if you're in trouble. And when I left Detox, I went and I was training this netball team, this girl I was going out with, trying to be normal, right? Trying to attempt to do something normal. So I went and played, and that was one of the first coincidences in recovery was that team we played was called the Concord Addicts, and I've never to this day come across a team called Addicts, right? I was like, what? And even one of the women there said, why weren't you at training, and I was trying to make an excuse, I think, and another woman said, he was in Detox, and I said, how did you know? And she said, I didn't, but I do now. And And that was the beginning of other, like starting to take risks and get a bit honest and vulnerable, right? Because that Monday night at that first meeting, not hearing anyone tell the truth, I started to tell the truth in places. After that game, I went home and then went to a local meeting at Liverpool. And the person that was meant to pick me up, and my girlfriend wasn't there. And I panicked. And I had to sort of get home. And all of a sudden, I felt like I was in my old stomping ground. And it felt dangerous. And I told my parents to change the locks, and that was back in the day before mobile phones. And I had to sort of go to the phone booth up the road and say, point out my dad in this restaurant. And anyway, they came home eventually and let me in. And it was the first time of really knowing things were different. My family was there, my brother-in-law and sister, and they were drinking to his birthday and having a birthday cake. And I just felt like I didn't belong. Even under a week later, I felt like I didn't belong. And I was laying on the bed, and my mother came in and said, is there anything you can do? She knew I was distressed. And she says, there's someone you can ring. There was. I had this guy's number. And I rang him, and I told him the truth. I thought that because I was really off the air and don't know what's going on, maybe I should go to a 12-step meeting. The only one was in King's Cross, and I lived in Cabramatta. It was a long way away. And it felt scary because it was at midnight, right? And so anyway, when I rang this guy, he said, man, you are doing great. He said, you've left Detox, gone to a meeting already, felt bad, rang someone you don't know. He said, you should go to bed. And that was the beginning of learning that ringing people and telling them what's going on, and it worked. So I've never stopped it. I was on the phone this morning to a guy with 30-odd years clean up, and he asked me how I was. I told him. It's like 34 years later. I still think it's one of the great tools, of recovery is outreaching. It's one of my favorite tools. Every morning when I walk to get in contact with God and get connected and do some exercise, people know they can get me. And I love outreaching. I was just talking to a guy that I made Real Men with, a Catholic men's sex awareness program, and said, man, ring me anytime in the morning. I love connecting now because I can tell the truth. My shame doesn't stop me talking to people honestly. Now, that wasn't always the case. When I go back and look at my life, I was silenced by shame. I was terrified by my mother's anger. I felt uncomfortable in my own skin, and I just didn't even have any language to talk about. My father just was there physically. He provided everything he could except emotions and intellectual conversational intimacy. I have no idea who my father is. It was funny, just then I was thinking about my eldest son. I really try to connect with him because I don't want him to go through that. I want him to know I'm available. I was a good kid up till about the end of primary school. I was just vice captain, and Nellie was captain. And then by the time I left high school, I was thrown out. And I was thrown out for a prank for a carton of beer, and I regret it to this day. And I ended up a Boilermaker. 1 week later, I was in a stiff pair of overalls and a new pair of steel cap boots, and I was Boilermaking. Friends of mine listening to this would know I'm not that good with my hands. I'm just not. I'm really trying to do I've got my Become Good Soil sort of knife here. It's a Christian men's program, and the idea of becoming a generalist and getting, I sort of stopped getting someone to do my yard and started, as a tree just fell down yesterday. I've got a chainsaw out there that I'll badly try and chop that tree up with because I'm trying to sort of get back into my body and into my hands. But back then I was a Boilermaker, and I didn't know why, but I used to weld with the helmet down. It's very isolating, welding all day, right? Being an apprentice, as soon as I could teach you to sort of just do as much work as you could, I would do it. And man, I used to dream about being anywhere else but there. They put me on the saw, I'd be on the saw for a week, right? Cutting 6-inch bits of steel, and I'd be writing song lyrics, just wanting to escape. But I used to wish I worked at Coles or Woolies and packed groceries just so I could say, have a nice day. I always knew I was going to talk. Little did I know, when I finally got to Detox, I didn't work for 4.5 months, and I just got a real job. Well, God gave me a job eventually. I was playing indoor cricket with an NA indoor cricket team called the Shot Ducks. So if any Shot Ducks out there hear this, Phil, I know Phil would remember that. And a guy came up to me and said, I heard you looking for work. He looked like Burt Reynolds. He literally had a Trans Am. And I said, how do you know? He said, that doesn't matter. He said, when can you start? I said, well, anytime. He said, good, I'll see you tomorrow. And that was cement cutting and drilling. And I think I got a couple of tattoos. I think I got that tattoo and an old motorcycle, and that got me riding the meetings. And I did it for 4.5 months, and then I had the inspiration that I wanted to help people. And so in my local area, there was a place called SWAP, Southwest Alternative Program, and it was a local program for addicts. And I went down, introduced myself to the guy who ran it, John Kluwer. He's passed away now, but he was one of my first introductions to a good disciple of Christ, a good Christian man. And another synchronistic moment happened. The guy found out I was in NA, and he said, "That's great, we've got an NA meeting starting here," and the closest one to Le Cabra was Liverpool. I said, "That's awesome, who's running it?" And we worked out pretty quickly they were running it, which you can't. You've got to be a member of the fellowship. And so that night I was going to Blacktown Monday night. I said, "Well, listen, I'll get some banners and some stuff, and I'll come and I'll open it." And I did, and there was me and a guy on the nod from Heron and another guy that had given up many years before, has just come for a look. And it was the weirdest NA meeting I've ever been in. But that meeting then, I was secretary and went to that meeting for about 5.5 years. And it was another example of how my life could take a turn. And I would say it was God influencing my life. That meeting kept me clean. And it also, in my community, I gave back, and it was a way of giving back and being there for newcomers that grew up and went to meetings where I lived. But about a year, what I got also from that swap place was that I wanted to volunteer to see if I would like working with people, and pretty quickly I worked out I wanted to do it. And so I applied for the local Higher Institute of Education, which ended up becoming a uni. The only reason I got a degree is because it became a uni while I was halfway through. And I applied for all of the courses, and I got in to do a Bachelor of Arts in Welfare, and I was just grateful. I'm dyslexic, I have ADHD, I had no faith I was going to do any good. I've just literally started studying the last couple of weeks again. I'm doing a diploma in ministry, and again, I'm worried that I just ain't got what it takes, but I'm just trying to trust God and do the next right thing. So I went to uni, and within the first 6 months of my first placement, I got a job. By 18 months in, I was working full-time and going to uni because I was 22, so I wanted to pay for my rent and food. And those jobs were working with youth and drugs, and I loved it. I just loved working with people, and I wasn't, like I said, not very good with my hands, but I seemed to be okay with people. And I worked at Wesdark, a place out at St. Mary's, and then Penrith Youth Refuge, and do overnight shifts, and cops dropping off kids in the middle of the night, and just being a safe person in their life. Then when I finished uni, I worked at a family centre for the Catholics, a Claffey Family Centre in a women's and family refuge. You'd never get a job like that now, and it was a great education, working with the nuns, and I just loved it. And eventually, when I moved and worked for Parramatta Mission, and I've worked for it was at that time I really started my own therapy, and started working for South Pacific Private, and that's where they introduced me to Peter Melody's work. It was my own therapy, and then starting to work at South Pacific, and they're based on the Meadows, and I loved it. That model still is a map for my life, and maybe that's another video doing that model. But to understand and validate that growing up in a family system, coming from genetic alcoholism, growing up with mental health issues, growing up with abandonment and a mesh. I was a mesh to my mother as the eldest child. It gave me a whole other picture. So now when people ask me who am I? So my name's Steve. I'm a drug addict, a recovering sex and love and avoidant addict, a compulsive overeater. I would identify as a codependent, but these days probably an ACOA as well. And these things don't define me, because I've also learned in my spiritual program, my Christianity now, been baptized twice in recovery. That's another story. But I'm a beloved son. What I didn't get from my family, the main thing I missed out from with when you go through childhood abuse and trauma is that you get severed from having a sense that you are delightful, that you have what it takes as a young boy, which translates into masculinity as feeling as confident in yourself. And And what happens when you're abused as a child? You remain immature and self-centered, and so it disconnects you from a mature relationship with God. That's why they have in different spiritual traditions stewardship. You are held by an adult and stewarded until you're ready to be confirmed or to be baptized. And when what happened for me is in early recovery, I got baptized. John Clure, I went to his church, but back then I had long hair and a beard, and me and my best mate who joined me in recovery, he was the best mate in my using, but he was so impressed by me getting clean, he just came with me. And we went to this church. I felt like we were the Blues Brothers at the back of that movie when they go to get Merv and the Magic Toads out of that restaurant. I felt like that's how we were. We were certainly welcome there. It was more about us being comfortable. And when I went to uni, I met Grant Howard, who's now the pastor at Street Level Community Church. And since Greg Hurst died with the Brotherhood CMC, he's taken over there as their minister. And he said, "Oh man, you should come to a church I go to. It's a biker church, and you're welcome, and you just wear your jeans and a t-shirt." And so me and Mark went, and it was unreal. It was unreal. It was so real. Greg was such a beautiful man, and I probably feel a bit sad now. Like all my life watching the Brotherhood, they were really decent men, really decent men. I got confused about the message, but the men were decent. And that means a lot to me. I grew up in the family where you said one thing and did another. So when I see people that are doing what they're saying, it makes me feel safe. And I see Grant now, taken over from Greg, and because he's passed, and he's doing an earnest job. He's just he's like me, dyslexic, has mental health issues. He's I'm sure he's got ADHD, but man, the passion in the heart for God. And my second baptism came because of him. He just said, "Listen, I can't tell you." It was a frustrated conversation because I'm a frustrating person to be in relationship with any way you cut it. And he just said, "Man, I can't tell you how I sort of love God. You've got to start talking to God and form your own relationship." And I contacted Brandon Henry. He's from Arkansas now. I think he's in Mississippi or somewhere. Therapist, beautiful man. And he put me on the Moving Mountains by John Eldridge, and that led me to Wild at Heart, getting baptized by John in the same place 25 years later that Greg Hurst baptized me. I understand I'm not here to convert or evangelize. It's just my story, right? I need a God I can communicate with, that have a relationship with. And so we went, I started going to Street Level, and I was riding a motorbike, and it was, I started playing music. My first sponsor taught me to play music. So the guy that was sitting by the saw wishing he could, writing song lyrics that he couldn't play music to could now do it. And so my recovery became a really rich experience. I was playing in bands and writing my own songs and going around and yeah, the only thing I couldn't do was drink and take drugs, right? And so in regards to therapy, I learnt Pear's model and just jumped at it. Worked at South Pacific, worked myself into the ground. Being a first child hero, I burnt out. Ended up in the Blue Mountains, and I had to rest for a while, and then got a job up there at a treatment center called Westmount. And when I look back, that was a place that wasn't trauma informed. And I had a client recently that I've known through there, and they were able to remind me that I'd done, I tried to toughen up there and be one of those tough therapists, and it's just not my go. I'm not good at it. I'm gentle, and I needed to be gentler there. And I, I've had to apologize to a few people that went through there that got that sharper edge that was not necessary. But I learnt things there, and I certainly learnt too that people can try and leave legacies when they leave, and you've got to be careful. That life moves on, people move on, and you've got to trust the next person's going to grab the baton and run with it and make it better. But I came back down, and I've done a few tours at South Pacific, but I suppose what ended up happening for me is I ended up in the job of the seat of people that inspired me. So the program director at South Pacific was a role that I got to that I loved. I loved it. I loved it because so many people that had worked there in that role were so good to me. Earl Cass in the beginning, Joanna Mills, John Falcon. I really felt proud working under those people. So when I got to that chair, I liked teaching the model. I liked stewarding therapists. I felt like it was an honor, right? So it was a big thing to leave there. Now I work for myself, and I'd sort of left there with a bit of a plan. Over the years, I was already sort of trauma informed, but the Australian Childhood Foundation had sort of started these big conferences down in Melbourne, and it was fantastic. There was this explosion of trauma-informed therapy, and people were hungry for it, like a rock concert. Ed Tronick, Stephen Porges, Dan Siegel, Alan Shaw. There was Pat Ogden, and it sort of explodes out into all other little tentacles, and so it got me excited. So when I left and started working on my own, I wanted to be a CSAT, Certified Sex Addiction Therapist, under Patrick Carnes, who was a hero of mine, and in personal recovery and in therapy. I've been reading, Out of the Shadows, Don't Call It Love since the 80s. I wanted to do brain spotting and tapping, so I learnt tapping therapy under Dr. Laurie McKinnon, and I learnt brain spotting under David Grant and Dr. Robbie Abels and Selene Souza in Australia, and did training overseas and here for a somatic-based, a body-based therapy. Very interested in a couple of other therapies, particularly sensory motor psychotherapy. I went over to the Serenity Center in the Pacific Palisades and did trauma work there, and really was impressed with sensory motor psychotherapy. And the other therapy I wanted to learn was emotional focus therapy, because I know that in relationship counseling, largely the two archaic schools of thought are insight gained through family of origin work, or insight gained through learning new skills and tools of communication. Both are really useless when you're in your trauma midbrain reactiveness. And so currently I've done the EFT training, and I'm in supervision with Andrew Winchester from New Zealand, and the brain spotting and tapping I still draw on, and the CSAT therapy and the ITAP, my relationship with ITAP, the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals, is probably my wheelhouse. That's my home base. But I suppose one man that I found through my work at South Pacific was a guy called Pete Walker. Now I can say, and I'm pretty excited to say, that this week I had my second session with Pete. I spoke to him about 4 years ago, and I just rang him as a consultant, and I wanted to ask him questions, because I'm at a point now, 30 years into doing this work, where I've got some ideas about what I feel is right for me and what's not. And it was a delight to talk to him. This is a guy that's done tens of thousands of work on himself. And I sort of have a very similar model to him. When it all comes down to it, it's that what I was looking for as a kid was a safe relationship with someone, anyone. And it needed to be with me, but in the beginning I needed to find a good therapist. And I've had some good therapists. I've got Dr. Alexandra Katahakis is my clinical supervisor for sex addiction. That's like being taught guitar by Jimi Hendrix. I have trained under June Lake, the Yalom therapy, and June, I think, is one of the sensational therapists in our country. Being trained under Patrick Carnes is a privilege, and all the other people like Stephanie Carnes' daughter and other people that teach through ITAP, like Robert Weiss, who is someone that I also am really encouraged and informed by, and has done a MOvember video himself with us, and that was incredibly useful. To train in the EFT model, and not by Sue Johnson herself, but by Jennifer Fitzgerald in Australia, and Eve, I forget Eve's last name, from New Zealand, but now to have Andrew as a supervisor, fantastic. John Lee was a mentor of mine. I've done lots of intensive work with him, and he's been a counsellor of mine. And John Falcon was a counsellor of mine there before he was my clinical director. I've had some great therapists. So if you're listening to this and you're a therapist, your vision unfolds, right? And everything you're going to do now is going to be old hat soon, because someone new and remarkable is going to come along and find another better way to do it. And I suppose what's happened for me now is I did enroll for a master's in counselling, but I've gone so far down the path myself that everything I tried to do there just seemed like it was old. So I've started in a diploma in ministry, and I do have a spiritual concept, and it's very specific. And I'm a Christian, and I've got a personal relationship with God now, and the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. It's changed the way I play music. I play worship music now. I love guys like David Crowder and Brandon Heath and Zach Williams. And I think Zach just won a Country Music Association award or a Grammy. It might have even just been a Grammy with him and Dolly sang a song. That's personal, and again, I'm not going to. If anyone wants to talk to me further about that, please contact me. I ride with the Brotherhood CMC and still do, and enjoy my relationship with them, and it's another way to minister to men. I imagine now with the CSAT therapy and the work I do with sex addicts and their betrayed partners, and disclosures and helping people towards healing and restoration is a big part of my life. Working with people around childhood trauma, being that safe person. That the one thing Pete told me about is that part of that corrective experience is that I become a safe person that they can start a relationship with which helps them then get in relationship with themselves. And they learn to have self-compassion, learn to have self-protection, learn to have self-identification, and they learn to self-care. And that all those other tools are all about getting someone to that safe place, a safe enough place to tell their story, have it validated, and start the thought blocking and substitution that is possible once we release trauma from our body. So if you're new out there to any sort of therapy, please don't give up. I had a man in here today that's going to a funeral tomorrow for a young man who's killed himself. People, this is what MOvember is about for me, is just trying to make little bits of information that just might get somebody enough awareness to reach out. The examine life's no picnic, but to see your drama clearly is to be liberated from it. So, yeah, you got to pick what sort of hard you're going to be in. The hard of growing and recovery, or the hard of avoiding and being disassociative. So as I finish this campaign, I hope that the videos have been useful, because I spent years in my recovery getting tapes and listening to them in my car, and now I listen to podcasts. And the reason I make something is just maybe I've got a take on something that might help someone, just like all the people I listen to. So yeah, please look at the other YouTube videos, pass them on to anyone that might need them. I was speaking to Chippo today. He's a mister at St. Matt's. He's already shaved his off. I reckon I'm going to get my wax ready for when this gets a bit longer and keep it a bit longer. But again, thank you for everyone that's supported anyone in MOvember. Because men, one of the things I'm going to do a video on shortly is by Dr. Omar Minwali, who is bringing a whole new lens to sex addiction and partner work. And he certainly talks about the trauma, the gender trauma from gender identification. And I think that that's a big part of why MOvember exists, because men are socialized not to feel and ask for support, to not be vulnerable. They're bullied by everyone for being vulnerable. I remember when Kim Hughes was the Australian cricket team, he had tears in an interview, and the focus of the interview was on the fact he was crying, I mean, men that don't cry kill themselves or hurt someone else. So I hope that if any of this has inspired you to reach out for help, please do. And I'll sign off for this MOvember. And thank you very much. Be gentle with your heart and take care.